President Trump has just ordered a dramatic policy shift. Certain chapters of the Muslim Brotherhood will be considered for designation as foreign terrorist organizations. This move, announced in late November 2025, immediately grabbed headlines in Washington and beyond. Why does the White House now want to label parts of the Muslim Brotherhood, MB, as terrorists? And what does it mean for U.S. security and Middle East geopolitics? In today's briefing, we break down the background, the details of the order, the likely reactions, and what this means from an international relations perspective. Background on the Muslim Brotherhood. Founded in Egypt in 1928 by schoolteacher Hassan al-Banna, the Muslim Brotherhood is one of the world's oldest and most influential Islamist movements. Al-Banna envisioned a revival of Islamic society, political, social, and religious, to counter Western-influenced secularism. Over the decades, the Brotherhood spread across the Middle East and beyond, spawning affiliated parties and groups. Hamas in Gaza is a direct offshoot of the Egyptian Brotherhood. In countries like Jordan, Tunisia, and Turkey, Brotherhood-inspired parties, for example, Jordan's Islamic Action Front, Tunisia's Ennahda, have even won elections or helped govern. At the same time, many governments, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, among others, have banned the Brotherhood outright. The MB itself insists it is committed to moderate and peaceful civic work, but U.S. and some regional leaders have long accused it of abetting extremist groups. As the image above shows, Brotherhood activists, seen in Jordan here, remain vocal. They often carry green flags with the Brotherhood emblem, a sign of its grassroots reach and popularity in some Arab societies. U.S. policy context, past stances, and why now? Historically, the United States has not designated the Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. Even after Egypt's 2013 coup against the Brotherhood-led government, Western powers, including the U.S., hesitated, citing legal and pragmatic reasons. In 2019, for example, President Trump considered the move at the urging of Egypt's President Sisi, but Pentagon officials and lawyers warned the group didn't meet the strict legal criteria for terrorism. Ultimately, no U.S. action followed then. Similarly, successive U.S. administrations, Obama and early Trump, rejected blanket bans, noting the Brotherhood's complex, decentralized structure. That has changed. In late 2025, several factors converged. First, domestic and congressional pressure has mounted. Conservative lawmakers like Senator Ted Cruz introduced bills this year to label the Brotherhood a terrorist organization. In mid-2025, the Colorado synagogue firebombing suspect's social media showed MB sympathies, prompting renewed calls in Washington to act. Second, the October 2023 Hamas-Israel war refocused American attention on Islamist networks. Hamas itself is an offshoot of the Brotherhood, so Washington is now scrutinizing any MB support for militant groups. Third, geopolitical alignment. The Trump administration is deepening ties with hardline U.S. allies in the region, Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, who have long demanded action against the Brotherhood. And finally, domestic politics play a role. Critics note that appealing to Trump's base, much of which backs a tough stance on Islamic organizations, may have motivated the timing. In sum, what was once fringe, even naive by some U.S. analysts, is now official policy. Trump's executive order, details and mandate. On November 24, 2025, President Trump signed an executive order authorizing a process to consider specific MB chapters for designation. Crucially, the order does not immediately declare the Brotherhood a terrorist group. Instead, it directs the State and Treasury departments to work with intelligence agencies and report back within 30 days on whether certain branches should be listed. These include the MB chapters in Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt. The order names them explicitly. After that report is due, the secretaries have 45 days to finalize any designations. If carried out, the chapters could be formally labeled foreign terrorist organizations and specially designated global terrorists, bringing the usual penalties. U.S. courts could freeze their assets, bar U.S. persons from giving them any support, and deny entry to their members. The order's fact sheet spells out the rationale. It claims MB chapters engage in or facilitate violence that harms Americans and allies. For example, it cites that after the October 7, 2023 Hamas attack on Israel, Lebanese Brotherhood-linked militants joined Hamas and Hezbollah in firing rockets at Israel. It also notes that an Egyptian Brotherhood leader allegedly called for violent attacks on U.S. partners on that same date, and that Jordanian Brotherhood members have long given material support to Hamas. In the White House's view, confronting these transnational networks is now a U.S. security priority. It echoes the administration's official line. The president is confronting the MB's transnational network, which fuels terrorism and destabilization campaigns against U.S. interests and allies. In practice, Trump's EO sets in motion a process. The White House itself acknowledges that the bureaucratic steps are mostly a formality. The secretaries almost invariably toe the president's line within 45 days. Once designated, those MB chapters would be treated like any other U.S.-listed terror group. For instance, banks could no longer handle their funds. Charities working with them risk prosecution, and individual supporters could face criminal charges. The aim is clear: give U.S. law enforcement and foreign partners broad authority to choke off whatever networks the Brotherhood chapters might have. Potential domestic and international implications. Domestically, this gambit is controversial. Supporters, including leading Republicans and pro-Israel voices, applaud the tough stance. Israel's government publicly praised Trump's action, calling the Brotherhood a threat to regional stability. Republican figures, even at the state level, are echoing the language. Texas Governor Greg Abbott, for example, last week declared the MB, and even a Muslim civil rights group, CAIR, to be terrorists at the state level. Many see this as Trump fulfilling a long-held promise to his base, but critics warn of serious side effects. First, legal and civil rights concerns. As the Brennan Center noted back in 2017, labeling the Brotherhood could have sweeping impact on many mainstream Muslim and Arab American organizations, since the term Brotherhood has been used as a smear for decades. Groups like CAIR, the Council on American Relations, fear that even ties to charities or just being vocal could invite unwarranted scrutiny. CAIR's director, Nihad Awad, has publicly urged that American Muslim charities should not be caught up in this, emphasizing that U.S.-based Muslim organizations serve millions of people abroad and are rooted in our country. But he also warned this could be abused. Some right-wing activists have long claimed every Muslim organization in the U.S. is a front for the Brotherhood, rhetoric which could intensify. Politically, the designation will become a talking point. Trump's allies will tout it as a sign of strength. Opponents will denounce it as scapegoating. In 2019, even White House advisors were split. National Security Advisor Bolton backed an MB ban, but Pentagon lawyers balked, arguing it lacked legal footing. Those debates may now resurface. For example, the order could face court challenges. Analysts note that U.S. law requires proof that a group engages in terrorist activity threatening Americans, which is hard to establish for a loose political network. As a former State Department counterterrorism chief put it back in 2017, he found no legal basis to designate the MB. Moving ahead might trigger fresh lawsuits or legislative pushback if it's seen as too broad. Internationally, the implications are mixed. Allies who already view the MB as a villain, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, will privately welcome U.S. validation. Egypt's President Sisi, who personally lobbied Trump for this in 2019, has long branded the Brotherhood a threat. The designation could buttress Cairo's justification for its own harsh crackdown on Islamists. In Israel, officials say this underscores the supposed link between the Brotherhood and Hamas. Prime Minister Netanyahu's office praised Trump's decision as the right call. That counters an organization they say endangers stability throughout the Middle East. 3HPJ, 4FMY, 3WPT at corhash.net. By contrast, the move is sure to alarm countries that have tolerated or Brotherhood figures. Turkey and Qatar, for example, have historically been more sympathetic to Islamist movements. Ankara or Doha may denounce the U.S. for interfering in Middle Eastern political currents, especially in a moment when Washington's diplomacy is focused elsewhere, like on Israel. Iran, which is at odds with Sunni Islamist movements, might quietly approve, but Iran was already on the U.S. sanctions list, so it's little practical change. Western European countries, which have not blacklisted the MB, will likely watch carefully, concerned that this signals a new U.S. willingness to equate Muslim civil society with terrorism. Diplomatically, the Biden administration's allies might find it strange. The U.S. is effectively taking sides in intra-Arab disputes. So while the order cements a coalition with anti-MB governments, it could complicate ties with those seeking to engage political Islam as a legitimate alternative. Legal, political, and diplomatic challenges. There are significant hurdles ahead. Legally, the terrorist designation process is quite strict. The U.S. government can blacklist organizations as foreign terrorist organizations or specially designated terrorists, but it must demonstrate they actively plan or execute violence that threatens U.S. citizens. The Brotherhood's chapters in Egypt, Jordan, or Lebanon have not publicly carried out attacks on Americans. In fact, U.S. counterterrorism officials in the past concluded that the MB's loose-knit structure and far-flung political ties made it hard to pin down. In 2018, a top State Department lawyer reportedly said the MB did not meet the legal criteria for terrorism. So, unless new evidence emerges, defenders of the Brotherhood might sue in U.S. courts to block any designation as arbitrary. Politically, the move will be used by opponents and supporters alike. Critics will argue this is an overreach that undermines civil liberties and diplomatic norms. They will note that broad terror laws have been misused before, and they'll likely compare it to earlier efforts to smear American Muslims by linking them to the MB. Indeed, FBI and justice experts in 2017 warned that casting the MB so wide could endanger charitable work by American groups, echoing similar legal objections. On Capitol Hill, even some Republicans have expressed surprise. After all, Trump's foreign policy team had scaled back on Middle East nation building. Will Congress support a sudden expansion of the Diplomatically, the U.S. must manage backlash. Turkey's President Erdogan has previously protested U.S. statements on the Brotherhood. Any new designation could prompt a formal complaint or delay cooperation on other issues. Qatar might face renewed pressure to crack down on Islamist funding, something its leaders have resisted amid mediation efforts. Even Saudi Crown Prince bin Salman, who is allied with Trump on many issues, may find the optics tricky domestically if international organizations cry foul about human rights, since MB bans can be seen as repression. There's also the question of implementation. For example, will this designation turn up in UN or EU lists? Currently, the EU does not consider the Brotherhood a terror group, so U.S. sanctions may have limited extraterritorial reach. Realist analysis: who wins and who loses? From an international relations standpoint, this move illustrates classic realpolitik. Realist theory, championed by John Mearsheimer, tells us that states act in their own strategic interest, often through alliances of convenience. By labeling Muslim Brotherhood chapters as terrorists, the U.S. is clearly aligning itself with a bloc of regional allies, Israel, Egypt, Gulf monarchies, who see Islamist movements as existential threats. In that sense, it is bolstering the balance of power in favor of secular or monarchist regimes that support Washington's agenda. This fits a realist pattern. The U.S. is effectively choosing sides in the Middle East's power struggle, strengthening states that promise stability, at least the kind Washington prefers, over groups with broad grassroots appeal. However, realists would also ask, does this actually serve America's national interest? The Brotherhood was not on the State Department's terror list, suggesting it posed little direct threat to U.S. soil. By turning it into a focus, the U.S. may sacrifice more flexible diplomacy for a symbolic win. Some analysts, like Rami Khouri, have pointed out that the move appeals to right-wing zealots in the U.S. and Israel, hinting that ideology and domestic politics, not security necessity, are driving the policy. A Mearsheimer-inspired view might caution that if this designation simply empowers authoritarian regimes to crack down on dissidents, it could backfire by fueling resentment and radicalism. In the long run, it may not make the Middle East safer for the U.S. Realists recall that bullying local actors can breed instability, which is ultimately against U.S. security. On the other hand, if this helps the U.S. shore up its partnerships, particularly with Israel, realists might say it strengthens U.S. geopolitical position in the short term. And in an age where U.S.-Iran competition looms large, shoring up Sunni Arab allies against groups like Hamas, a Brotherhood offshoot, could be seen as narrowing Iran's influence. But that is a gamble. Whether the Brotherhood chapters get labeled will likely be irrelevant to the Iran issue compared to sanctions and regional power plays. In sum, a realist would advise watching the outcomes. Will this designation deter anything concrete, or will it primarily signal U.S. fealty to its allies? It certainly signals who Washington is not targeting. Noticeably, powerful states like Saudi are unaffected. If stable relations and counter-terror cooperation improve with allies, realists may call it a success of statecraft. If it sparks blowback, say, making Qatar and Turkey more intransigent, or pushing young Islamists toward extremism, it could be seen as a strategic misstep born of political posturing. Conclusion: in the coming weeks, the political world will be watching closely. The Trump administration has thrown down the gauntlet on the Muslim Brotherhood, a move with deep historical echoes and contentious implications. We've traced the Brotherhood's origins and reach, reviewed the details of Trump's executive order, and explored how this policy could reshape American law and international relations. Whether this becomes a defining security action or a controversial sideshow depends on how the process unfolds and how both allies